Welcome to Anglo-Romani with Pricey. I'm Pricey, and this is the series where I take a look at the Anglo-Romani paralanguage / dialect and look at the etymology of particular words as a lens for the history and culture of Romani people that made it to Great Britain in particular. In this particular episode, I am looking at animal names once again. I already looked at animal names before, and those were the ones which I could remember. Now I'm looking at some of the words that my father could remember when I asked him about it way back then at that particular time. And there were 10 names that I got from him. But in today's video, I'm going to look at 7 of them. The reason why I'm leaving 3 of these names off is because one of them clearly is an English onomatopoeia that seemed to only be adopted specifically by my dad's family. Another one is disputed, and I'm waiting for my dad to kind of ask around and get back to me on that one. And even then, I'm not so sure as to what's going on with it, but it seems to be based on another English word. And the third one I will look at, and that is actually the word for squirrel. I'll look at that in a different video altogether when I come to, like, I don't know, a different topic that's not animals. You'll see what I mean when that word comes up at some point in the future. In any case, let's get into this. I will say that I am quite ill today. I was ill before Christmas and I thought I got it out of the way, but no, feeling pretty gammy today as it turns out. Anyway, let's crack on. So I'm starting today's video with one of the most easily traced words to Sanskrit, that being Bakra, meaning sheep. Like most of the words in today's video, it's not a word that I personally remember growing up with, but my dad was very confident that Bakra is sheep in his family, and it's just one that seems to have escaped my particular attention. As I mentioned, this word is very easily traced to the Sanskrit Bakra or the Prakrit Bakra, not to be confused with the singer of Yes Sir I Can Boogie, and it's one of the most pan-Indian words in Anglo-Romani, being that it has very close cousins in Hindi, Urdu, Gujarati, Bengali, Nepali, Marathi. There may be more. Bakra is sheep, and apparently Bakra is something very similar to sheep, or Bakra, or Bak something or another. Very common word across many Indian languages, including Romani. Continuing on with farmyard animal names that can be very easily traced to Sanskrit, let's talk about Gruvni, which means cow. Gruvni, I do believe I've heard a couple of times growing up, but it's not a word that I particularly remembered. And it comes from the European Romani Guruv. That in turn goes back to the Prakrit Guruva, and at least that's how I think it might be pronounced, feel free to correct me. And that in turn goes to the Sanskrit Garupa. And of that, only the go part means cow, that first part, so the go. The rest of it actually refers to the shape of it, so cow shaped is literally how it translates. Like Bakra, go in particular, meaning cow, is found across many Indian languages today. Carrying on with farm animals, let's talk about Kanni, meaning chicken. Kanni was not easy to find. Unlike the previous 2 words, which were very quick to go back to Sanskrit, this one was a bit more confusing. But once again, it was the French Wikipedia page for the Romani language in general that put me in the right direction. At least I think it's the right direction, because this one is really stringent. So according to the French Wikipedia page for the Romani language in general, the Anglo-Romani Kanni seems to be linked to the continental Romani Kajni, or I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce it, but I'm gonna put an approximation up on the screen. And this in turn is linked back to the Persian word for domestic, so not even like to do with chicken itself, that being khanji, or I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce it, but like kanji or something along those lines. And that in turn, like I said, didn't mean chicken, but Murkhanji apparently means domestic poultry, and I'm guessing Romany people, when they were passing through, just picked up on the latter part of that and applied it to all poultry. And then, because this wasn't confusing enough already, Yaron Matras in his own research found an alternative spelling of the word, or an alternative pronunciation of the word, that had features found in Baltic languages like Estonian and Finnish. And just to make it even more confusing, the Estonian and Finnish word for chicken is kana. Very similar. So if it did come from Persian, and there's also this Estonian/Finnish word kana meaning chicken, that's one of the biggest coincidences in this series yet. So if you watched People 1, you may remember that the very commonly known Anglo-Romani word chav, meaning child, was traced back to an older Indian origin word meaning young of an animal. Well, Bawla, meaning pig, is somewhat ironic, because Bawla itself, another word that I didn't really know growing up, but I feel like I may have heard here or there, comes from the continental Romany Barlo, and this in turn was traced back very easily to the Sanskrit Bala, and across many Indian languages, Bala, and including Sanskrit, means boy, as in a human boy. So there's been this weird ironic twist where young of an animal ends up meaning human child, and young of humans ends up meaning pig. I think it's fair to say that the dialect of my particular family is not the purest form of Anglo-Romani, and Anglo-Romani itself is not the purest form of Romani. And so it didn't surprise me at all to find that my family's word for duck, Potna, is many other Anglo-Romani families' word for goose. However, it turns out my family were the ones who were slightly more accurate for once. Now, before I move on to the etymology of this word, I will say that the pronunciation of this word is kind of interesting. It's kind of like pot and then like a glottal stop, na, but it could also be like potna or popna. I don't know. I kind of pronounce it with like a glottal stop, so potna, like almost like you're putting a comma in there to sort of like cut it short and then na. But like I say, this word means duck in my family and goose in a lot of other British Romani families. But when I went to actually look for the etymology of this, I was finding nothing when looking up like goose across sort of the Romani language and the various places that the Romani language has come from. And then I remembered I have been trying to learn like Greek with very, very little success for quite some time. I wouldn't even say that I can speak any Greek, and there's barely a few words that I do remember, but one of those words is papia, meaning duck, as it happens. And it turns out this is exactly where popna, or papna rather, came from. So my family's word popna seems to be traced back to papna in continental Romani, and then this word seems to be traced back to the Greek word for duck, papia. So if you watched Animals 1, you'll know how confusing this word is. Matchka is one of my favourite Anglo-Romani words, meaning cat, but in my family it also means fish. Now this one's a little bit strange in how it got there, because so many other Romani families in Britain use matchki or macho, and I imagine what happened is a word like matchki was used at some point, and then the two terms just got blended together based on how similar they sounded, and you just had to pick up from context, am I talking about a cat or am I talking about a fish? Most of the time, in my experience, it was always referring to a cat, but my dad insists, growing up, you just had to work out the context of what his dad was talking about if he used the word matchka, because that was either cat or fish. Now the biggest difference here is that while I was able to trace personally myself, without even having to look on the internet, the word Matchka to Slavic words meaning cat, Matchki, referring to fish, has a completely different origin point, and it's just very coincidental that they sound very similar but mean completely different animals. So as I mentioned, other Romany families in Britain use Matchki or Macho, and it's this latter group who have it the most sort of authentic, in at least for want of a better word, as the continental Romany also use Macho, and this can be traced through Saraceni Prakrit and Ashokan Prakrit Macho back to the Sanskrit Matsya, and this in turn can be traced all the way back to Proto-Indo-Iranian Matsyas, all of which means fish the whole way along. So yeah, those who use Macho have the most sort of like historically accurate form of the word. But in my family, we used Matchka, meaning fish, and Matchka, meaning cat. And like I say, you just had to pick up on the context to know what is being spoken about. The last word from my dad's vocabulary of animal names that I'm talking about today is the word nickel, meaning bird. Now, this one's kind of interesting again because nickel doesn't show up in any other sources that I was able to find referring to bird, but instead I was able to find a lot of references to chirically, and indeed a variant of that, chiricle. So I think what has probably happened here is that chiricle was used and then kind of melded with the English word nickel, and at some point my dad's family and my ancestors just started using the word nickel to refer to birds, and it kind of stuck. Now going back to this word chiricli, or as it's known in continental Romany, chiriclo, this one was very easily traced to the Saraceni Prakrit Chidiga or Chidiga, I'm not entirely sure how it's pronounced, and that in turn was traced back to the Sanskrit Kataka. And both of these last two words mean sparrow, which is kind of interesting because when my dad uses the word nickel to refer to birds, it's never like a big bird like a seagull or an eagle or anything like that. It tends to refer to anything that you could probably fit in the palm of your hand. So it's kind of interesting that that element of it has been kept. We're talking about small birds in particular, it seems. But I would have to ask him if he would refer to an eagle or something as that, or if he would just use the English word eagle, or if there was some other word that would jog his memory. But if so, that will be a topic for a future video, and I will leave this video here with these 7 terms. Those were the remaining terms that I'm going to talk about that I can think of right now for animals in Anglo-Romany, or at least in my family's sort of dialect specifically of Anglo-Romany. Feel free to comment, especially if you know some of the other terms that other families use. I'd be very interested to know about that. And feel free to check out the rest of this series if you haven't already. Like I said, I've referred to People 1 and Animals 1 in just this video alone, so if you haven't already checked out the rest of the series, please do. And if you're up for it, check out the rest of my channel for retro gaming and music discussion. As it turns out, I am playing the original Tomb Raider next week. And feel free to like this video, comment anything else you thought of, and until next time, have a good one.